I kind of like this. It's I think this is what a user group should be, loud and so on between sessions. And I like Daniel's sessions, but to be honest, the user group isn't all about sessions and someone talking and presenting stuff. It's you guys meeting and networking, and I don't know. It's actually quite small city, especially if you work with data platform. You know most people who are professional in the same area, so it's nice to have a. I know Brent also calls Pass Summit the family reunion, but something like that. Thank you again, sponsors. It was just there. I'm going to talk about Rebar set, Rebar bad and sets good. By the way, my name is Magnus. I didn't say that. I am the treasurer of SQL user group, which doesn't mean much because we have an external accountant who does all the finance stuff for me. The treasurer. The treasurer. Yeah, I'm the treasurer. The treasurer. No, but this is what I like doing. The administration is just boring stuff, but it's nice to do meetings and stuff like that. And it's nice to have a mix of like local community edition. Both me and Daniel works in Stockholm, and then next time might very well be someone we all read on blogs and internationally known speaker. And I kind of like the mix that we have all of it. And if you have something to share at any future meeting, it doesn't have to be an hour. It could be 10 minutes, just something cool that you did. By all means, just contact us and take the stage for a little while. That's what I think this should be more about. And maybe less about just listening to someone who we all admire. I mean, it's fantastic to have Itzek here now and then. It's always good, but it's nice to hear what you guys do as well. Now for that, so Rebar bad, sets good. Something about me, my name I already said. I'm a database consultant with Transmocopter SQL. Transmocopter means something, but it has nothing to do with data platform, but it starts with a T, so I can get the SQLug.se domain for that. So it's good. I am a certified trainer, so I do some training on AdSkills Cornerstone, mainly the mock courses from Microsoft. So everything from beginner's class for T-SQL to data warehousing and database administration. I used to be a developer. Recent years, I've done more pure DBA tech stuff, but I still see myself as a developer. I started as a web developer. Or actually, my first IT job was to be a Microsoft Access consultant. How many of you use Microsoft Access professionally? It's the second best product that Microsoft put out. No. It is. The contents. I'm going to talk about Rebar. That's how it's supposed to be pronounced, according to Jeff Moden, who I think was the one who came up with the name. Might have been someone before, but he's gotten the credit for it. And different variations of it. So Rebar, can anyone tell me what it means?
Row by agonizing row.
Row by agonizing row, correct. And a database, a relational database, is good at not so many things, actually. But it's good at working with sets of data. And it's not equally good at working with items of data. So it's a relational algebraic engine that is good at just that. So row by agonizing row means we or the optimizer or someone did something wrong, or at least not in an optimal way. I came up with this session because I've done quite a few mistakes myself during the years as a database professional. And others have done mistakes, and I have somewhat been affected by them. It meant overtime for someone else. And mistakes could be by design as well, which I will come to. But I see them as mistakes when you get the database, or you treat the database as purely a set of items, or rather the items themselves, and you try to handle your data item by item. So that's what Rebar is all about. So I'm going to start with Rebar by T-SQL loops. My presentation doesn't contain as many pages as Daniel's. I think he's had 134?
173.
173, okay.
Mostly copies.
And he had no Management Studio demos. So it's kind of a good mix, because that's kind of what I do in this demo. So this is a setup. I don't think I need to say much more than this. I have a table in my database. It's called dim date. It has a date key and some other data. It has a natural date and a weekday. It's a typical dimension table for data warehouse. I know there are data warehouse professionals here, so it's not the complete date dimension, but it's a date dimension. As I said, I do some teaching, and I get the teaching material from Microsoft. So on their data warehouse course, they have some examples of this is a date dimension. And it actually says in the disclaimer, don't look so closely into the code, just run it. So you get your date dimension done. But I did watch a little bit more closely into the code, because just a couple of pages before that in the textbook, they say that you shouldn't treat the database row by row. You should treat it set by set. And so to fill this date dimension, they have this wonderful code, or a variant of it. I'm going to truncate my table so it doesn't contain any data. I'm in the right database. So it's a declare, number of rows.
The text level.
Sorry?
Can you enlarge the text level?
Absolutely. Let's do 175. Let's do 175. If I say it loudly, it happens, right?
Right.
Perfect. So we declare a variable, number of rows. And then we declare a counter variable, I. This is very C#y. Yes, already a question.
You named C#. One question.
Yeah.
Is it a good practice to have an end bar chart, a column, if you only need to store the weekday name in English? Why Unicode?
It is, in this case, the question was this, nvarchar, is that really a good idea if we store the week name in English? And generally, no, it's not necessary, at least. And now it actually says weekday name _en, so it's going to be English in this column. If I want to store other languages, since it's a very denormalized model, because it's a dimension table, then I would have weekday, I don't know, Arabic in its own. But then it would make sense to have nvarchar. So no, it's not very thought through, because English probably will fit into whatever collation I've chosen for.
Maybe EN stands for Eritrean.
Yeah. Maybe EN stands for Eritrean. Yeah, we go with that. So a counter variable. I declare a date variable. You will know where this is going. And I declare a variable called measure, which is a date time 2, where I store now. And then I start looping while the variable I is less than number of rows. Then I begin. And I set my date variable to whatever I get when I add minus I to right now, current timestamp. I do my insert into dim date with some values. I make up a date key, which is an integer instead of a date, because it makes for better joins, probably, in the dimension table. The actual natural date, and some more data. And then I increment the counter variable by 1. And it's not awfully bad, to be honest, when it comes to performance, because it's 1,000 rows, so it's going to loop 1,000 times. But I think it's just a bad example when Microsoft creates course material for their own product, and they say that you should treat it not as something where you pick item by item. Don't do loops in T-SQL unless you really have to, and probably you don't have to, even if you think you have to. There are ways to solve problems in a set-based way, most of the times, or all of the times, I would say. We're going to run this code. And I did a set no count on. Let's do a set no count off and run it, just to see what it actually does. Execute. And even with 1,000 rows, it runs for 812 milliseconds to just insert 1,000 rows into a table. And it's a sequential stream of dates. It's today and yesterday and the day before that, and so on and so on. So does anyone have an idea how to do this in a more set-based manner? I heard some whispering, but no one wanted. So Lotta's answer is, why would you? It's a data warehouse. It's run once. Well, it makes for a quite bad habit if you do your setup scripts this way. A recursive CT.
Single-threaded.
Tally table. That's how I'm doing it. So that's a suggestion. I'm going to truncate my dim date table. I still want to know how many rows, so I'll declare the num rows variable. My measure is just to measure time from start to end. And then I do a common table expression, which I call 10. It's selecting the column I from a set which I create with a values clause, which consists of 10 ones. So 10 rows. The value 1 is not going to be used anywhere anyway, but I could have done null or anything, but I chose 1. I name this derived table T, and the column name is I. So it's a 1-column table with 10 rows. And then the next common table expression I call thousands. And it's doing a select top number of rows from my common table expression 10 cross join by itself a few times, quite many times actually. Since this is a variable, could be dynamic, it's an integer, so I guess it could be up to 2 billion rows, but then it wouldn't fit into a date anyway, but it could be more than 1,000. So that's why I have all these cross joins. But if I just look at what I get from this common table expression, I apply the row number function, by the way. That's what I'm selecting. And row number ordered by select null. So I don't actually order by anything, but row number is going to give me unique row numbers. And that's what I want. That's my tally table. There are different variants of doing it. You could create a row store table in your database, which you create either this way or by cross-joining sys objects with sys objects with sys objects or sys columns or what have you. But what you want, a tally table is a table containing an ever-increasing number, usually starting with 0 or 1. So that's what I get with the common table expressions. I don't materialize it. And this plan won't materialize it into tempdb as well, either. So let's look at select star from thousands. I execute and I get a data set containing numbers 1 through 1000. And then in the while loop that we saw in the previous example, we use the dateadd function. So I'm going to use that as well. So I have my common table expression dates, which will do select date add day, and the number of days is n minus 1, and n is coming from the table thousands. And I date add that many days to current timestamp. And current timestamp is same thing as get date, but current timestamp is the ANSI function, whereas get date is a Microsoft arbitrary implementation. So that's what I get from this dates common table expression, and then I can do my insert. And I do my insert the same way, the same type of calculations. I get the date key, the natural date itself, and then the date part weekday, the date name weekday. And if you look closely, you will see that date name weekday, I don't explicitly set the language of my connection, so it could be anything. I just happen to know that I have English as my language, so it will be an English name. But really, that is not the most important thing of this script. If I run it the whole way through and with the measures to see how long it takes, without the truncate, because that's done already, I will get it running in 10 milliseconds instead of what had I before, 832 or something. And it does the same thing. It's just that the first script tells SQL Server how to do something. It gives SQL Server an implementation to something that SQL Server is already really good at. So that's kind of why it's a big difference. So instead of row by agonizing row, I define a set, which is ordered, and then I use that set to do my insert and some function calls in the insert. How many have heard the concept of a tally table before? Quite many. So good. I mentioned Jeff Moden, and he has written quite a lot about tally tables and different uses of it. But when you start using it, it's something that at least I find more and more use cases for it. And it will be a good help in eliminating loop constructs in your code. So there you go. I think this, since Microsoft anyway, I guess the reason to do a loop is because it's more readable for a beginner. But when they have the instruction, don't look at this code, just run it. They could at least have written, I mean, somewhat decent code instead of using a loop. Yeah, sorry, that should have been what I measured, of course. So let's do the truncate.
Maybe also do it in a transaction.
First do it without the no count and then try the transaction.
Say that again, Erland.
So I said you can first try do one thing at a time when you do performance tuning. It only takes one thing at a time. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and Erland says do one thing at a time when you performance tune, and it's absolutely true. So we should have 4 outcomes. There are many, I mean, in combinatorics, we have a couple of parameters that we can change that will give us 4 outcomes. But let's at least do what Erland said. Let's do the no count on first, and then do it without a transaction. Then we add a transaction and see what kind of difference we get. When it comes to the set-based approach, it's already one single transaction because it's just one insert. So we don't need to explicitly define a transaction. It's going to be equivalent. So begin Tron, and I should do the commit before I look at the timing. I didn't do the transaction this time. I just took away the set no count off. Declare, that should be the code we're gonna run, and execute. And it's 505 without the no count. Well, with no count on. And I'm not going to test the set-based approach with no count on because it's just one row count that it's going to print for me. So I don't care about that. So let's do it within a transaction then. Begin tran, and then we're going to do the commit down here. I'm going to go up and truncate the table. And let's try again. And the select dative is, of course, important if we want to measure time. Now it's actually down to 16 seconds. It's still slower. Yeah. So transaction did a lot of good. Why did it do a lot of good? Because every single pass in this loop is a transaction in itself if I don't define a transaction outside of the loop, which means we're going to have to flush stuff to the transaction log with every pass of the loop. I would still say it scales when I add more rows to this. The set-based approach is going to scale. It's still a little bit faster. It's going to scale a lot better.
Sorry, just a question.
Yes.
Are those 16 milliseconds versus the 10 milliseconds, is that within margin of error? So like if you run it a few times, will it maybe sometimes it will go 12 milliseconds? Or is there still 50% faster to do?
To be fair, with a small number of rows, I'm not sure, because when I get this this timing, I'm not even sure it's always going to be faster, because the number of loop steps are so small. We're going to need to do it more times to see a certified difference. I mean, I could run the set-based approach many times. I could also optimize this one a bit.
Blows up with 200,000. Be great. The 6 milliseconds, no, that's not significant anymore.
No, that's 60% more.
Yes, still 6 milliseconds in a computer.
Yeah.
Let's do 100,000 rows. Truncate. This is fun. I was on the Group by conference the other week, and there was a session later the same day on the European sessions, which was Adventure, the performance edition, and it was all about, hey guys, I have this horrible query. Does anyone have an idea how to optimize it? And then the whole session was just throwing in ideas and testing them, and it was fun. Let's do 100,000. $15.35.
Dino scales.
And let's do 100,000 with set-based approach. It's going to be quite embarrassing if we come up with something much worse now, right?
Row by agonizing row can be a best practice.
553. Yeah. So that's significant. But to be honest, I'm streaming a live stream video from my database server because my database server is my laptop. So don't do that. Brent Dosa wrote something today or yesterday, which is, would you play Fortnite on your database server? Well, if you say yes, then you should keep going with RDPing into your database server and run Management Studio on it. But otherwise, don't do that. So, and that's the same thing here. I have Management Studio on the server. Don't do that.
What about the tally approach or having a predefined number table already in the database? So to have a table containing just numbers.
Yeah, we could try that. So let's do, instead of actually doing the whole shebang, we can do select star from 1000 star into dbo.tally. And then, of course, we're going to need to add a clustered index to it because it's going to be quite unfair to have a heap when we work with ordered. Maybe if I wake up first. So now we have it. We must declare this scalar. Come on, Magnus. There we go. And then I'll do a create clustered index ix. Do you prefix your index names ix underscore or something? It's kind of old school. It reminds me on when tables were named TBL underscore something. It doesn't add much value, really.
Something underscore. Better.
Ah, so you have a suffix. That's advanced. So ixn on dbo.tally n. Come on.
Hang in there, Magnus. Just 40 minutes to go.
So now we have it, and we could scrap this portion of it and do with dates as. And instead of thousands, we're going to select from dbo.tally. Is this really something that we need the numbers up here? Now I created a tally with exactly 100,000 rows. So I still need to do the top on it. So I need the num rows and the measure. So let's copy that down here. As select top num rows.
You don't need it because you have 100,000.
Yeah, but I want to do the top because that's something that I want to have to. I mean, I'm not always going to have the exact correct number in my tally table. Usually I have more. So
You should rather have where condition. Yeah. So on top rows, yes, 2 top rows from 2 million to 2 is 100,000.
yeah, I need to do the order by if I'm going to do the top, because otherwise it doesn't mean much. But yeah, I could have the where condition. Where n between 1 and 100,000. Yeah, and num rows. There's a lot of red. I think it all comes from IntelliSense not knowing about tally. So I'm refreshing it to know it looks good. So I have my declares. I select from the tally instead, and then I do my insert. Violation of primary key. So yeah, I didn't truncate. I think we're going to leave this demo soon if I don't get this working. 597. But did I press the execution plan button now? Or what? Did I use the execution plan, or did I present the execution plan all the time? No, I can't have in the loop.
Because the numbers should be like before the probably was running the execution. So you probably press some keys.
Yeah. So let's do it without the execution plan. And do the truncate. Come on. Bear with me. Truncate table dim date. And execute. And 719 this time. I don't know how the measurement when the execution plan gets materialized, but it still has to be present or at least returned. The graphicalization of it that SSMS does.
That happens after you close the execution plan.
Yeah, so all I get is an XML.
A couple of queries and all they will have the execution plans. But if you would do that with execution plan on with the loop, yes.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. But then what I would get is, first of all, with every pass of the loop, I would get an XML of the execution plan. They would all look the same, but I would also have Management Studio not crashing, but eating a lot of memory because it's going to do a graphical representation of 1,000 or 100,000 execution plans. So don't have your actual execution plan on when you do loops. It's bad. Or don't do loops. Yeah, let's go back here. So that's some row by agonizing row by T-SQL loops. And yeah, with the small number of rows, it's not that much of a difference, but it does scale. So I don't know what kind of function would describe how they would differ if I run it a number of times. Now I just did one of each, and it's not really a good performance measurement, but it shows something. Rebar by T-SQL functions is my next demo. So I talked to Daniel before, and he said, I don't know how they do it, those presenters that don't have like slides or anything to help them keep track of where they are in the presentation. And that's kind of why I have it. The slide itself doesn't add much value. But it tells me which is my next demo. So I think it's this one. Yeah. SplitString. How many here have implemented their own SplitString function? Quite a few. That's the first time I stumbled upon Jeff Moden. He wrote an article on SQL Server Central about SplitString. Quite many different ways of doing it. One is a loop, and it's not the best way to do it, but it's a way to do it. So we're going to stop with that. I've seen this in I was doing some not performance tuning, but SQL injection fixing of a database. It was a HR system that had, I think, around 20,000 stored procedures in total in a couple of databases. And they all most of them used dynamic SQL completely unnecessarily, and they didn't use parameters at all. If you want to know about dynamic SQL and search functions and so on, then read Erland Sommarskog's blog, because he has written about it, and he has presentations about it too. There are good and bad ways to do it, but that's how I came up with this demo, because I fixed their split string function, and then they came back saying, no, we're happy with what we have. And they had this. Create or alter function, split string. If you're going to split a string into something, pieces, it means you're going to return a data set. So it's a table valued function. And if you're going to do that row by agonizing row in a loop form of way, it means it's going to be a multi-statement table valued function. And if you have heard multi-statement table valued functions, you probably know where I'm going to with this. Anyway, this is what a multi-statement table valued function looks like. It has a create function. We have some parameters, which is the string we're going to split, and the separator. It returns a table variable, returns t of data type table with one column, varchar 100. So this function will only work if each item is 100 items or 100 characters or less. That's how it is. Begin, we declare a couple of variables, and then we start looping. While char index of the separate, so the position of the separator reading from left to right in my string, while it is larger than 0. So I'm going to get 0 as the result if there are none of my separator in my string. Then I set the position character to this char index. I do an insert into my table with a value, which is the substring of my string, position 1, and then the position where I have my separator -1, because I don't want the separator in there. And then I set my string to something shorter by removing the things I already treated, and then I pass, make another pass in the loop. And then I insert the remainder of the string. By the way, this is what the function looked like. If you pass an empty string, it's gonna not work well, because it's gonna return an empty string. But really, if you want to split something based on, for example, commas, and you pass an empty string, then I would expect an empty result set. But this is what the function looked like. So it's I've created something or copied something that works equally bad.
Is there a do while or repeat? Because you are invoking char index twice for each iteration.
Yeah, I wouldn't have to do that. So I could have done the char index outside of the loop, the first char index, and then while that position is larger than 0, and then I would have to do it once inside the loop at the end of it. So that would have been a way to do it. So I have to do this twice, and of course it's another function call, so I do it twice. But what's bad about this approach is not really if my loop construct or if my function calls are efficient or not, as we're going to see when we use it. Did I create it? Yeah, I think I did. So now I'm going to repeat some strings with the different combination of comma separations. And okay, sorry. First, I just do a select with, I split a string with 10 items using my SplitString Rebar function. And it kind of works. We could look at the execution plan for it. Does that make sense at all? Yeah. So we have the table valued function SplitString, and we have a
Returns a table scattered with table variable.
yeah, exactly. So we have this function which, but I'm not quite sure actually how to read this plan. But
I think it runs, the table value function runs first, and then the sequence operator returns the table scan. Alan, you're welcome to correct me.
Yeah, so something like that.
yeah, so but we're doing it with one string now, so it's not the end of the world. And that's what the response was from the company that I tried to be helpful against. They said, no, we just run it against the individual strings. And then I saw in the code in other procedures, which were probably introduced much later by someone who didn't respond to this, that they indeed had tables with comma separated values, which they did cross-apply to. And it didn't look very good. An alternative approach would be to do a similar thing as we did with the dim date. We could use a tally table for this too. So I have some values, I multiply them, yeah, and then I have a common table expression which I call bounds, which is starting with a 0 as the first boundary value. And then it selects every position from my tally table, which is on the position of my separator in my string. And then I add the outer boundary, which is the length of the string plus 1. And then I get the individual values in my vals common table expression, which uses the boundaries to do a substring to get the actual items and skipping the separator from it. So let's create this function. One thing though to mention, since this is a set-based approach, it's only one select that I'm doing. Then I can do a inline table valued function instead of a multi-statement table valued function. And the way it's done is I have my create, and instead of returns a table variable, it just returns table. And if you have this, then the only thing you can have in the body of your function is a return statement followed by something that produces a data set. And since it's a function, it can't really alter the world around it. So it can't be an insert with an output statement. It has to be a select. So let's create it. And then we try it. And I have my execute. I get the same result. That's a good thing to start testing. Did it work? Yeah. And the execution plan, it looks so much more complicated, right? And it has nested loops. Didn't Daniel say that nested loops were awful? Well, it's nested loops with kind of a warning too. There is no join predicate. Yeah, that's my cross joins in my common table expression where I just want to produce numbers. But the reason why this plan looks so complicated and the one with the multi-statement table valued function looked so small and beautiful is because the optimizer will see the table valued function as just a black box. Oh, it's something, it will give me data. It doesn't take the contents of the multi-statement table valued function into consideration at all. I could have shown you an example of a multi-statement worth, a scalar valued function, I would say. But I'm using SQL Server 2019, and they implemented this smart thing about the optimizer understanding what the scalar function actually does and inlines that code into the execution plan. So it's kind of clever. I've wanted for a long time to have the kind of single statement scalar function where it could be inlined. But instead they implemented something where they inlined something which is multi-statement or could be multi-statement. So it's the optimizer guys, they're smart. If we do some rebar on speed with this, we'll create a temporary table which will contain some data, and the data will be comma-separated strings. It throws an error. There is already an object. Do I have a select in 2 somewhere? I have a create table, and then I don't have the go. It's okay, because let's drop it and make sure we get all the rows into it. I have this at the end, go 5. It means the batch is going to be executed 5 times. It's not a T-SQL thing, it's a Management Studio thing to do the batch 5 times. And it's because I wanted more data. And I have the... Do you remember what Erland said? Is it a good or bad thing to have the execution plan on when you do a loop? Well, generally it's a kind of bad thing, but let's leave it running. It's going to be done soon, I hope. At least what I'm doing is I'm eating up all my buffer cache with Management Studio instead. So I'm going to page stuff out. Do what I say, don't do what I do. Okay?
So, what are you doing this weekend?
Well, first of all, I'm going to kill this. I'm going to drop the table. I'm going to unclick this button. I'm going to recreate the table. Go 5, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that it doesn't take the rest of the evening, because it's quite boring to watch. Still boring, right? So who has the best SQL joke in here? I think some of you have heard my best, and it goes like this. What did the DBA tell the developer?
No.
It doesn't matter. The developer wasn't paying attention anyway. But what did the developer ask the DBA? It doesn't matter. The answer was no. And this horrible query is not done yet. So I'm soon going to call it a day for this query and just say I think it had enough. At least we have some data in our table. Yeah, let's see how much. Well, 482,000 rows, that's enough. So what I want to do is I want to select the value val from, well, not actually from my table, but from my SplitString function. So I'm going to select from my temporary table containing 480-something thousand rows, each with a comma-separated string, and I'm going to apply the SplitString function for all of them with a cross-apply, and I'm going to run it. And instead of returning the data, I am doing select variable equals and then the value, because I don't want what's taking time should be to return the actual rows. It's to process the data that we want to measure. So let's go. This is the Rebar version of it. It's a learning thing that when I do my demos at home without streaming video from the same computer, SQL Server has access to quite many more CPU cores than it has now. It doesn't have to wait for it. So this usually doesn't take this long when I prep for it. We have waited now for 40 seconds. Yeah. 45. Let's give it a minute. If it didn't finish, we'll try the other one, which is the set-based approach to a split-string function. There is something about split-string. It is actually a function in SQL Server nowadays, which is built in. And I think it is not at all implemented as a T-SQL function under the hood. It's implemented with a language that is good at splitting strings, which, regardless on how we look on it, string manipulation isn't T-SQL's strong suit. But there are bad and worse ways of doing it. So, okay, we got 75 seconds from the Rebar version. And let's try the set-based T-SQL function, which is now a inline table valued function. And it's also quite boring because it's not half as fast as it was at home, but like 13 seconds versus 75, so that's considerable difference. And we could look at the execution plan for this. I'm going to rerun it once. It's just 13 seconds. I'm not going to rerun the 75-second version.
If you want to completely tank your computer, you can run it with live query time. Awesome for demos.
Yeah, it's nice. So it took a little longer. And it looks very much like when we did it with, you see all these nested loops to create some numbers. And then in the end, we come up with the numbers and we have a table scan of our temporary table. So table scan means it's a heap. It doesn't mean anything in this case because we're going to read everything. The order doesn't matter at all. So I didn't create the clustered index on it. But here we see what's actually happening. We get the table scan, we get the sort operator. Don't ask me why it's sorted. Because it doesn't have to be sorted. But
no, because of the tables pool, it doesn't want to do duplicate work. If the same string appears multiple.
Oh yeah,
it's lazy.
We got a table spool here. So yeah, that's true. Quite many rows, yeah. Yeah, that's smart. So there was a good reason for it. If I would run this with the execution plan on for the Rebar version, it would look super simple. It would be a table scan, and then it would be a function call to my table valued function, and it would look like that was a single operator. And the operator is table valued function. But you saw the code for the multi-statement table valued function. It's not just one operator, it's a loop. But the optimizer sees it as a black box. It's going to call it for every row. So imagine that for every position in my string, I'm doing a loop. And for every row in my temporary table, I'm doing that loop for every position in the string. It's not going to be good. Well, the built-in T-SQL function will be even faster. But if you're working on older versions, I think SplitString came in SQL 2016, like most other new cool features. If you work on SQL Server 2014, then you don't have SplitString built in, so then you need something. And you could either build a T-SQL function, which is okay, or you could use a CLR function, but then you have to enable CLR for your database. So it's a choice.
But what if you try the built-in function?
Yeah, select string split, select star from.
I think you can just copy the old one and just change your function to the built-in one.
Yeah, true.
And the column is then value it memberships.
Ah, okay. So
Rows 154 to 157. Oh,
and value.
Now your execution has made, okay. What does the matter anyway?
4 seconds. And I had, with execution plan on, 15 seconds. With execution plan off, I had 13 seconds. That could be just by chance, but let's switch off execution plan. And it's still a couple of seconds. So yeah, 4 seconds versus between 13 and 15 or something in that area. So a lot faster, but it's also built, the string split function that is built in a language which is suitable for doing string manipulation. T-SQL isn't very good at it. It's good at many things, or it's very good at few things. Erland.
Yeah, so yes, since this one was faster, but the inline thing, I got some bad news there, because I ran on my blog website. You can find it's quite over. I did some performance tests of various string splitting functions, and some of the inline, because I will also try to join you with tables, and some of the inline functions, sometimes it was a complete disaster, because the optimizer was just too smart for itself. I found a completely disastrous plan. It could take 20 seconds when it should take sub-seconds. So that's sometimes, so that would, so let's say you're sending in a list of values. Okay, I don't want all the values in this value that want to join to that table. And with an inline function, the optimizer got a choice.
Yeah.
And also for that, I like to mention one thing about this, because when you're doing, because it's quite common, you're sending in the comments of a list, so give me these values. Okay, so then you want to know how many rows, does the optimizer know how many values there are in the table, because that could affect, because then also doing a join. So, and this is tricky. Up to 2014, it makes a blind estimate. 2016 is going to make a blind estimate, but in 2017 is going to make an interleave execution. So it will, the first time you run the function, it was okay, it will return 3 values. Okay, I'm going to go with that for the plan. But if you use string split, the built-in one, it will always assume 50. So that could, because that could also affect performance, of course, if you're going to join to other tables, because that has a huge impact.
That's true. In short, Alan talked about the you talked about the inline scalar valued function.
So
the inlining.
If you have an inline table value functions that you have split string sets, you could, if you then go and introduce and join with some other tables, you send in a list and say, I want these IDs, and then the optimizer can get that. Oh, I got to do it this way, and the performance goes completely out the window. Yeah,
so what Alan's comment was about, for those not in this room, was a lot to do with cardinality, basically. What will, how will the optimizer solve a problem when I do it in a set-based way with a tally table in an inline table valid function? Well, it's going to do it one way if it thinks it's going to return 3 items. And it's going to do it one way if it thinks I'm going to return 3 items and get 30 rows from the table I joined to or cross-applied to. And it's going to do it in a completely different way if it thinks it has 500,000 rows with many items in each. And that estimation isn't always very good. The positive thing is the adaptive query execution, which comes from SQL Server 2017 and on, where SQL Server will kind of record, it does so in the plan, how many rows did I estimate and how many did I get, and if it's wrong, it's going to adjust the estimation for the next time it runs the query. And it's going to do that a number of times, and then it's going to fix it. So if you have if your data distribution varies a lot, then this could actually become a problem in itself because it locks the execution plan at, then you'd have to go with like option recompiler or something anyway to get a new estimation and hope for that one to be a good one. Let's move on. I'm going to do one more demo and then we're going to call it the day for presentations, and then you can stay around like the B3 guy said. So Rebar in execution plans. We talked about developers doing bad things in the previous demos, or suboptimal things. But the SQL Server Optimizer will also do things in a suboptimal way sometimes. Daniel talked about the nested loop join. And I'm gonna do I'm gonna start wondering why I have question marks in my code because I haven't put them there. Something is happening. I am gonna create some tables first.
Probably just replace all the question marks
with a go.
It seems like they could have been eventually done.
The devil is in the demos.
Go. Maybe you're supposed to go.
I'm not sure what this is.
I think they're just line breaks.
Could be. I hope I don't have variables. I don't actually remember. We'll see if it works to begin with. And the only thing I'm going to do is to create some data anyway to begin with. So done inserting data, go. Yeah, it's line breaks. Not all of them though.
No, I think that was actually a question mark probably.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. So I have data now in tables. And this is fantastic. Go, man. So this is an order system. It's super simple. It contains an orders table and it contains a customer table, cust, and I'm doing a join. So I get orders and some information from the cust table. The simplistic thing about this data model is that the orders don't contain order value or order details, but who needs those? And I do this for a specific order date where o.orderdate equals yesterday. Come on. I hit the end button. So I'm going to run this and I'm going to do it with the execution plan on. So I'm not going to go into details about what I did when I added data, but I did this by the end of the script. I created indexes. And when you create an index, you're going to get perfect statistics for those indexes because creating an index means scanning all the data. So you will get a statistic object which is created with full scan. So it's kind of the best you can get with a histogram with X number of steps, enough steps for this data anyway. So I'm going to execute. And I'm going to tell you something about the data itself. I have 300 customers, I think. And I have roughly 100,000 rows, orders per day for those 300 customers. That's why this execution plan makes a lot of sense. I get the clustered index scan of the customers. So they're ordered by customer ID. And then I get an index seek in my orders table on a non-clustered index, which is called ix_order date cust ID. So I have an index over order date, comma, cust ID. That's my key columns. And for this specific query, it's a good index because I query my order data by date and I join it to my customer table to get some customer details. And then SQL Server reverses it when it executes it and starts with the customers and then gets a stream of orders, which are ordered. I get one specific order date. So it's a single value of order date. And then the secondary column, the second column in my key is the customer ID. So it's going to be ordered by customer ID, which means we get the merge join. And a merge join is non-blocking. It doesn't use a big memory grant. It won't spill to tempdb and so on. It will stream data and return it. So it will read from two streams and just mash it up. So that's good. And this is, even if it's a super simple data model, it's quite a realistic scenario that you will get orders and then you will have a warehouse system which you push those orders to, or the warehouse system will collect them. And it will typically get all the orders which are older than the last time it collected orders, right? And this has a built-in problem into it. Because now I have perfectly updated statistics. I add some data for the next day. Must declare I got my go. The question mark came in the way. So now I lied, it's only 33,333 orders per day. And now, the next day when the warehouse system wants that data, it's going to do the same thing it did yesterday. It's going to ask for, well, yesterday's data, basically, but now it's the day after. And I've done this dynamically because I don't want to hard code the dates. So I have max order date, and I get the max order date from my table, and then I use that to kind of simulate that I want that specific date. It doesn't really matter. What matters is this. If I execute it, and we look at the execution plan now, this one, you will see that we get first an index seek on the orders table. So SQL Server has flipped these two operators. Now it gets the orders, and then it does a cluster index seek into my customer table. So the customer table has 300 rows. I get 30,000 orders, and I get 30,000 index seeks into my customer table. And I can promise you that those 300 rows of data, they would fit into, I don't know, 4 pages. But this is going to be 30,000, at least 30,000 IOs. Probably more, because it has to find the row as well. So it will start at the top of a B tree and then find the leaf level, which is the actual row. So at least 2 per row. And if we look at the statistics for it, I have 66,666 logical reads. So of course I could do an update statistics. And I do it with a full scan. And then I can run the same query again. And let's see if I have any goes in it. I don't. And now I get the good plan again. We start with the customers table. And my IO is 74 logical reads instead of 66,000. So it's quite a big difference. And now it's logical reads. It doesn't go down to disk because everything is in my buffer cache. You don't know that it's going to be all in your buffer cache. It kind of depends on what else happened in your databases or on your server since they were inserted. So if this would be physical IO, it would be much worse. It wouldn't be 66,000 physical IOs because it would only get the data from the customers table. And once that is in the buffer cache, it would just read from buffer cache. So we could repeat this. I'll insert some more data. I'm going to take away the go. So we go to the next day. Blah, blah, blah. Come on. There we go. And how would we solve this problem then? Anyone have a good idea? Because it's going to return. The problem is going to come back to us. Unless we, every time we get data to the warehouse system, does an update statistics. But that's going to be quite intrusive. We're going to scan data. Yeah, that's one thing we're going to look at. Erland says we could change the compatibility level. And that's the thing we're going to look at. Because if you looked at the top of the script, I set my compatibility level to 100, which is SQL Server 2012? 2008 even. Okay, old stuff. I think it would have been the same with 2012, but not with 2014. I'm not completely sure. We're going to come to that. But let's see, I'm not going to do this again. But we're going to look at how to get rid of the Rebar plan without having to update the statistics every time. And we could tell SQL Server to do things in a different way. So we could, instead of just doing an inner join, we could do an inner merge join. And then SQL Server will either succeed in producing a merge join plan, or it will fail to execute the query. That's kind of the bad part of it. Because if I tell SQL Server that you're going to do an inner merge join and SQL Server can't do an inner merge join, it's going to give up. It's not going to fall back to doing a nested loop join.
Also, it doesn't just force the join type, it forces the join order. So which table is on top and which is on bottom. So that's the warning text you can see.
Let's look at it.
Hints are dangerous.
So inner merge join, yeah, it starts with the orders, but it does a clustered index scan of the customer table, and then it merge joins. So yeah, it flips the order. Start with the orders and then gets the customers. But the key thing to us here, it's going to get all the customers in one pass, and that is just a few pages to scan, and then it's going to match it with the orders. But like someone said, I'm not a fan of hints. Of course, you can use hints, but the very smart guys in Seattle who work with the SQL Server product, they actually come up with some good ideas sometimes. And so you patch your SQL Server, and if you have many hints in your code, you might end up having to do a lot of testing and see, is this hint still valid or not? Is this hint still valid or not? Because you don't want hints that makes the query perform worse than it could. Because if the optimizer solves the problem for you, you shouldn't use the hint. That's my point, at least. We could try something else. We could try to optimize for. I'm not even going to show you what's not going to work. this is something that won't work. The hint optimize for max order date equals a variable value. That won't work because it has to be a literal value, fixed value. So if you're going to do optimize for, you have to kind of hard code the value that you optimize for. So we could try to optimize the order date to be 1st of October 2019. Then we get the good plan, start with the customer, and then get the orders and merge join. So that's what we wanted, right? But now we have a hint, which is optimizing for an order date, which may or may not still be in your table in 2 years' time. Many order system delete stuff or moves them away to other tables. So 1st of October might very well in 3 months' time be gone. When the order...
So are we.
Can you use the optimize for if it's in the stored procedure? Then it's then should be a constant value that instead of hard.
No, I mean, if you have it in a stored procedure, then you would have to... No, because the plan has, when it produces the plan, it can't use a variable value. It has to be a literal value. And when the plan is created, it's created for the whole batch. So if you have a variable value in a variable, I don't think SQL Server is going to be able, I mean, it's not going to work. It's not possible to do it. But if it would, it wouldn't make sense because it would evaluate the batch and it will try to create a plan for it. And then it wouldn't know the actual values because it won't look into the variables. But no, the short answer is it won't work anyway because you have to have a constant to optimize for. Another solution, which would be?
Well, without I think with, so, okay, you don't have anything more with optimize for.
No.
Okay. So the simple solution now is you comment out the whole option thing and done it.
Yep.
Even the option recompilers, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you will get an older plan. You will get the reuse of a hopefully better plan.
Or because now, since it's a variable, it doesn't know the value of the variable.
That's true. Yeah. So then it's going to come up with a plan which would work for kind of any value. Because it doesn't know the value. If I do option recompile, then it has the declare and the set value to the variable will be done in one statement. And then if I have option recompile, then all of a sudden SQL Server knows that, oh, wow, now I can look into that variable. I know the value and it will create a plan for that order date. If SQL Server doesn't know at all, it will try to fix this problem with what it has.
Well, yeah, which is the density.
Yeah.
It knows how many rows there are per order date.
So density vector is what it's going to look at. And now, without the hints or anything, we will get this. And that's going to work if you have a somewhat even distribution of data. If you have a very skewed distribution of data, it's not going to work equally well. This is an example where I have every day has the same number of rows for orders. And that's probably not going to be true in a real scenario. Saturdays and Sundays would probably be a bit lower and so on.
Excuse me for stealing your thunder, but there is still a use for the optimized for hints here, because let's say now by chance, this has happened to me, that there is a recompile trigger because it changed statistics when the query runs, so then it will know the value of the variable. But then you can say optimize for unknown. So you explicitly say that as well.
Option optimize for
Max order rate.
it's a space. See how often I use this hint. Max order date unknown, just like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then it's going to create a plan as if it didn't have any idea about the max order date, and then it would use the density of it. And I don't know the name of the index, but the statistics object will contain, well, a little bit more than two things. But one thing is a histogram, which is values and an estimation of how many rows has exactly this value and how many rows do we have between this value and the value before in the histogram. So that's the range rows. So that's what it's going to use to create the plan if it has an idea about the value, which it has on the first compilation. It has to have some kind of idea to make an estimation. But if we optimize for unknown, it's just going to skip this whole histogram stuff, and it's going to look at another part of the statistics object, which is the density, which is it's read, the way it's used is how many of each kind of, let's say I have statistics for order date. Yeah, how many rows per order date? Then it's going to be expressed as a number between 0 and 1 in the density vector, because it's these select, now I don't find the word for it, but I mean it's the
Selectivity.
Sorry?
Selectivity.
Yeah, the selectivity of it. So if 1 is all the rows have the same value, that's what it means if density is 1. If density is a half, that means you have 2 values. If density is 0.25, it means you have 4 values, distinct values. So that's what it's going to fall back to. And if I change the compatibility level to a more recent one, for example, 2019 or 2017, which is at least supported version, what SQL Server will do is it will look into the histogram. And if the value I'm searching for falls outside of the histogram, it's going to revert to the density vector to use that instead. And in 2019, there are some optimizations, and you can use hints to optimize for ascending key, which I haven't looked into, I just read about it. But that's what this is. This is an ascending key problem. And the efforts done by the SQL Server development team is to solve exactly the ascending key problem. But this could very well happen even if it's not an ascending key. Because now we have the order date, it's an ever-increasing thing. You could have gaps in a time series which are inserted later. They won't come into the histogram, but they're also not outside of the bounds of the histogram. And then you will still get a bad plan for it. But you can't have it all, right? So there's been lots of development work to kind of help us get rid of this problem, because it's a common one, that you have tables with increasing values. And it doesn't matter how many times today you update your statistics, you will still not do it often enough to get rid of it. So optimize for unknown is a good thing. Optimize for a distinct value if you know that that value is going to stick to the table, or upgrade SQL Server to always use the density vector when the value falls outside of the bounds of the histogram. Yeah, time. That's good, because the demo I had, which I won't show you, is me trying to write some C# code. I'm going to post the demo scripts to my blog, tsql.nu, and you can read it. What it is about entity framework and how entity framework does things row by agonizing row. And then some other code to do some magic with serialization of objects on your own, and then pass them as a table variable to a stored procedure in T-SQL instead. And it's also a true story. It was kind of, yeah, I'll write something about it or catch me later and I'm glad to talk about it because it's one of those rare occasions where you have 10 developers deciding that we're going to use this new fantastic framework and it's super good and it's super simple. We don't have to care about the database. And I try to, as diplomatically and politely as I can, tell them that's a fucking bad idea. And it turns out I'm right.
And the framework is the best thing that has happened to DBAs ever.
Yeah, it's at least if you invoice by the hour, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
So thank you. That's all I had. I'm almost as good as Daniel at PowerPoint. So thank you. It was fun. I haven't seen if there are any questions from the other cities because it's hard to see that on screen here. But come talk to me later. And you guys, if you are in, for example, Helsingborg, ask Peter because he would know. Thank you.